The former Soviet Republic of Belarus has seen its current president, Alexander Lukashenko, sweep to yet another term in office as he extends his reign, which originated back in 1994, and sees him as Europe's longest-serving president. Yet the incumbent president is not favored by many foreign powers, with both the US and the EU placing sanctions on the nation, including trade sanctions, arms embargoes, transit control, and financial sanctions, something that Russia clearly opposes, as stated by the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov.
Есть вопросы, которые необходимо обсуждать, это очевидно. Но пытаться сразу же выступать неким судьей, как это пытаются делать наши западные коллеги, и сразу выносить свои приговоры, еще пытаться исполнять эти приговоры путем введения санкций и прочих угроз, мы считаем недопустимым в современном мире.
Election results have seen multiple protests in Minsk and across Belarus. Yet, much like the sanctions that have been placed on the country, it is clear that foreign interference is also involved in the protests, with President Lukashenko pointing his finger west as to who is responsible for the unrest.
Планируют все это и направляют в Соединенные Штаты Америки, а европейцы подыгрывают. Сказано так, делают так. Создан специальный центр под Варшавой, и мы контролируем, знаем, чем он занимается. Начали.
Hello, or Dorpizin, and welcome to Economic Divide with me, Kavatahwe. In this week's episode, we will take a look at how Belarus is coping on an economic front, and how the recent election results have seen the people of Belarus launch a trend of foreign currency purchasing in the country, adding to the economic uncertainty across the nation. Don't forget, we always want to hear from you on our show, so why not get in touch with us by visiting our Twitter page using the marker @ED_program. We would love to hear from you and share your stories, so don't be shy. Get in touch with us and let us know about the stories that matter to you. Well, one of the main issues that Belarus is facing at the moment is in the post-election period, and that's the notion of currency devaluation. This is coming about in the form of a rapid demand for foreign currency by the residents of Belarus, with some figures showing the value of the Belarusian ruble to have dropped some 11% since mid-June. The value of the Belarusian ruble sank to a historic low on August 27th when it saw its price versus the US dollar hit 2.66 rubles. However, President Lukashenko stated that nobody was clinging on to the ruble exchange rate in order to try and restrain it. However, in spite of the reassurances by the president, the demand for foreign currency has now leaped fivefold, far surpassing the typical supply that exists, and hence seeing the birth of a black market supply of dollars and euros, with some people buying dollars on the border of Poland at 3 Belarusian rubles per dollar, some 10% above the official rate, hence seeing some people exploit the economic situation in Belarus.
On Sunday the 9th of August 2020, Belarusians went to the polls to elect their president. The main two candidates were the incumbent Alexander Lukashenko, who's been in power since 1994, and Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, a former English teacher who stood in at the last minute to replace her arrested husband, Sergei Tikhanovsky. The results of the election saw the incumbent president Lukashenko take 4.6 million votes, equating to 80% of the popular vote, compared to just under 600,000 votes for Tikhanovskaya, equating to around 10% of the vote. The remaining votes went to other independent candidates, giving Lukashenko a landslide victory.
Лукашенко Александр Григорьевич, за него проголосовало 4 652 423 или 80,23%. Тихановская Светлана Георгиевна, за нее проголосовало 574 312 человек или почти 10%, 9,90%.
However, the results did not appear to appease the minority of people who supported the challenger, and has since seen multiple protests take place across Belarus, with marches being held on a regular basis, demanding that Lukashenko step down due to a rigged election. This has resulted in some people who are opposed to Lukashenko walking out of some of the nation's largest companies, from potash production workers to fertilizer factories, oil refineries and teachers. However, in spite of this, Production's still around 70% capacity, as those in support of Lukashenko hold the various industries together. The European Union has also refused to acknowledge the results, with foreign ministers meeting to discuss the outcome. However, it seems that the EU and the United States appear to be in support of the demonstrators taking to the streets in Belarus, with the incumbent president blaming the West for interfering in the internal affairs of Belarus. Yet Belarus has its fair share of support for Lukashenko, with many people attending rallies and marches in support of the man who's led the country for over 26 years, standing by the man who's overseen one of the lowest unemployment rates in the world and sees the nation dealing with Russia, China and the EU nonetheless. In spite of being called Europe's last dictator, something that appears to be a label of jealousy by others over a man who has the clear support of the majority of his nation.
Did you know that Belarus has one of the lowest rates of unemployment in the world? Well, official figures from Belarus put the rates at less than 1% of the people. In 2011, there were only 28,200 unemployed people in Belarus. But are those figures truly accurate? Well, it seems, however, that the true unemployment rate in Belarus may be near to the 5% mark, and seldom dipping below 4.5% in reality. However, figures have been steadily falling since the year 1999, when the unemployment rate was at 12.8%, which shows that there's still something to be proud of for the Belarusian job market. Belarus, as a nation, has a GDP of around $62 billion, placing it in the region of both Costa Rica and Croatia in terms of global rankings. The majority of exports from Belarus come in the form of mined products, chemicals, vehicles, and non-ferrous metals. Belarus's main trading partners come in the form of Russia, of which 38% of its imports come from, as well as the EU, which 30% of its imports arrive. China is also a major emerging trading partner with Belarus, with the nation seeing around $3 billion worth of goods shipped in from China.
Belarus has a natural geopolitical history linking it to Russia through its common past of being a member of the Soviet Union and having a shared language and culture. With 38% of imports coming from Russia to Belarus, the ties between the two nations are the most important for Belarus, in spite of much interest to broaden their economic field on a wider and deeper scale, say for example with the EU and China. Belarus is also an important trading partner and ally of Russia, as demonstrated by the words of the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who has issued an open and frank warning to anyone who either tries to influence or take advantage of the current situation in Belarus, or for that matter, tries to persuade Belarus in any way to break away from the zone of influence provided by the Russians. One of the clearest worries for the United States and Europe is the Belarusian partnership with Russia on a military scale, with both nations enjoying close military ties, as seen in numerous joint military exercises and operations in the region. This not only brings the Russian military sphere a step closer to Europe in holding a partnership with Belarus, but it also poses a threat to NATO, who feel that the largest threat to the Western security comes from Russia, and is hence why NATO have forged closer ties and placed more resources on the European Eastern Front. Many then could legitimately question the notion of Belarus being a buffer state between the EU, NATO and Russia. However, this is clearly not the case, as Belarus is in fact far from a neutral country, say for example in the case of Switzerland, but is in fact aligned to Russia in the form of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, or CSTO, which is essentially a revamped and modern version of the ex-Warsaw Pact that stood as a Soviet mirror image to NATO. It's therefore safe to assume that Belarus will, for the foreseeable and long-term future, remain highly aligned to Moscow, whether Lukashenko's in power or not.
Joining me in the studio today is Dr. Lev Lvovsky, a research fellow in economics from the Barak Economic Research Center in Belarus. His research interests include microeconomics, demographic economics, inequality, and uncertainty. He's also had numerous publications including Demography as a Challenge for Economic Growth and Political Responsibility for Economic Crises. Dr. Lvovsky, many thanks for being with us today.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
So first up, a lot is happening at the moment in Belarus following the elections, but how is the country actually coping on an economic front, in particular in the face of the ongoing global COVID-19 pandemic, which has hit most countries around the world in some form or another?
Oh, here in Belarus, we wish our main trouble will be economic crisis caused by COVID-19. The unfortunate truth here is that we should start from the way before. Belarusian economy was in stagnation for the last decade. This year, even before COVID-19, we estimated potential growth of our GDP to be between 1 and 2%. After COVID started, we understood that it will be a hard year for Belarusian economy. We were not fully ready. So the best estimates were between 4 and 6% drop in our GDP.
Well, Russia is naturally a huge trading partner for Belarus. EU also playing a role, with figures suggesting that imports from Russia are around roughly 38% and the EU at about 30%. How important then is Belarus as a trading partner to both Russia and the EU? Do you see any emerging trends there?
Well, Belarus is a small and open economy, so it is natural for us to trade with our partners, with our neighbors, and therefore it is natural to trade with Russia, our biggest neighbor, we share common language with Russia and part of common history. We are in trade union with Russia, so it's natural that our main economic partner is Russian Federation. With respect to Europe, of course, it is our another big neighbor and very important partner. It happened that right now, probably about 70% of our trade happens with Russia. But I think that it is important for our future to increase our relationships with Europe, to increase trade, to diversify our trade and our risks.
Okay, finally, Belarus has an extremely enviable unemployment rate. In fact, one of the lowest in the world. What is Belarus doing to achieve this, and can other nations learn from these incredible figures?
With respect to unemployment, we have actually two numbers of unemployment. Probably you're talking about this number which is below 1%, but this is not a correct estimate. Our government also does estimates according to international standards, and before the recession, our unemployment rate was indeed relatively low. It was about 4.6%, which is very good for a developed nation in Europe.
Okay, Dr. Lev Levovsky from the Baruch Economic Research Center in Minsk, Belarus. Many thanks for your valuable input, and thanks again for being on Economic Divide.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right. It's time for us to take a short break here on Economic Divide, but don't go anywhere as we have plenty more coming up. We're joined by our regular current affairs and impact analyst, Mahan Abedin, as he runs us through some of the stories that he has found. We'll also take a look at the Belarusian EU ties when it comes to trade, and also look at how the rest of Eastern Europe and Baltic nations have emerged economically from the post-Cold War era. And finally, we'll take a look at some of the other economic headlines hitting the front pages in our regular info news slot. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short message. Welcome back to Economic Divide with me, Kavatahwai. Time now to take a look at some of the headlines hitting the front pages around the world of business, finance, and economics with our Info News report. First up, we begin right here in Iran. The U.S. has decided to go ahead and try to reimpose UN sanctions on the Islamic Republic. The problem is the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has told the Security Council first that it's not clear whether the U.S. reimposition of sanctions on Tehran actually applies, adding that the UN then will take no action on U.S. what's called snapback push against Iran. In Africa, why isn't violence decreasing? You need to ask actually where the arms dealers are getting their arms from. In what's titled Africa, the Big Ripoff, an arms deal, this article states Africa's armies are kitting out. The US and Europe in particular spend big to support countries on the continent in their so-called war on terror. Now that has drawn corrupt arms dealers to the same. And finally, banks in Europe are feeling the COVID-19 squeeze. They are considering mergers for survival. They are drawing plans on how they will face a chronic period of low rates of interest, a depressing financial outlook, and souring loans, which may rise as debtors wrestle to maintain their jobs and their companies. Let's now take a look at how Belarus is trading both on an economic and political front with its western neighbor, the European Union.
The election results in Belarus appear to have triggered the greatest negative response from the EU, with multiple leaders refusing to accept the election result as fair, with claims of vote fixing being the main theme surrounding the EU's point of view on the topic. However, for the EU, Belarus is more than just an Eastern European neighbour and trading partner. Belarus for Europe is a key point of contact to make Russia uncomfortable, something that most of the EU, as NATO members, are happy to do. The EU, for one, believe that any abnormalities within the Belarus elections, for example, come from the influence of Russia, and hence why the EU Foreign Policy Chief, Joseph Borrell, has stated that he believes that Belarus, as an independent state, should not have to deal with Russian pressure concerning their internal affairs, preferring that Belarus decides its own fate. Yet, would this very same rhetoric then not apply to the EU as well when it comes to Belarus?
I have heard many times from Russia the mantra that this is a domestic internal affair for Belarus and they do not want external interference. I suppose it's also valid for themselves. It is solely for the Belarusian people to determine their own future. If Russia believes in the independency and sovereignty of the nation states, it will respect the wishes and democracy's choices of the Belarusian people.
We've already established in the previous report that Belarus is clearly more aligned to Russia than the EU. However, there are still some ties between the two, although not all of them are warm. One such example is the signing of a partnership and cooperation agreement in 1995, which was designed to govern mutual political and economic relations. Yet this agreement was still not fully ratified by the EU. There's also much speculation about Belarus considering the notion of joining the EU as a full member, with one poll conducted by the NISBY Institute in Belarus in 2009 suggesting that around 44.1% of Belarusian people would vote to join the EU should a referendum be held. However, that figure could now be lower in Belarus due to the implementation of sanctions by the EU on the nation. Like with many sanctions around the world, the imposing of sanctions could, however, be another political tool in the statecraft of the EU to imply pressure on Belarus from within as people raise their voices of discontent against their own government, at which the sanctions are targeted, but never reach.
Joining me in the studio today is our regular current affairs and impact analyst Mahan Abedin. Mahan, welcome.
Thank you.
Your first post is really interesting because it makes you wonder whether this is actually true or not because of the way they're trying to enforce it. But of course, you tell us more about it.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect it's true because, you know, Belarus hasn't just come onto the headlines. You know, it's been a big issue for the West for at least 2 decades, not least because of its proximity to Russia. It's an ally of Russia, and also it hasn't caved in to this neoliberal kind of order. You know, it hasn't become so-called liberal democratic like the rest of Europe. It has its own system, a strong president, etc. So here you have, they were offered this huge bribe, but with all these caveats.
The last one crashed the economy. What do you think that means?
Well, it could mean anything. You know, it could be, you know, embracing, you know, the Western neoliberal regime, borrowing. I mean, when you borrow money from the likes of the IMF and the World Bank,
here's the thing.
Lots of strings are attached.
Do you think this is being highlighted somewhat because the real purpose would be to see Belarus fall? Because we know maybe the West, i.e. the U.S. perhaps, wants to get on the border with Russia,
Sure.
and would maybe want this system
But
to
actually,
fall.
the EU, you see, you have to make a distinction here between the foreign policies of the EU and the United States. Yeah, the US does like NATO to move as close to Russia as possible, right on its borders. But as far as the EU is concerned, they just hate Lukashenko. They want that system to fall. They want market
But they lifted
penetration.
sanctions on
They want
Lukashenko.
market penetration. Yeah, well, there's been, the UK has been engaging with Belarus for a long time. The UK even sent a military force there in March in partnership with Belarus. It's a complex picture.
Okay.
But the bottom line is, they want the system in Belarus to go.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
You're
We
welcome.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Mahan Abedin there, our current affairs and impact analyst. Okay, at this point, we're going to take a look at how other Eastern European and Baltic nations have seen their economies change, adapt, and cope with the post-Cold War era, and examine how the EU has either helped or hindered them into the nations that they are today.
The president of Belarus has placed much emphasis on the notion that both the Czech Republic and Poland are playing a part in both supporting the demonstrations against Lukashenko as well as hosting certain opposition groups, respectively. Yet these former Soviet-influenced states have now found new allegiances, and hence could be why they're supporting the factions that not only go against Belarus, but also in an indirect way, go against Russia. Since the end of the Cold War, former Warsaw Pact members such as Albania, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Poland, Estonia, Lithuania and Latvia have all joined NATO, as well as a host of other such states. Many of these and others have also joined the EU. So how then have their economies fared since this transition? For a start, in terms of being NATO member states, the fact that around 2% of their respective GDPs need to be handed over to NATO is a significant price to pay to be a member, considering the Cold War has long frozen over completely, and the realistic chances of entering a genuine conflict with Russia is highly unlikely. Is NATO hence worth it for such nations? Furthermore, joining the EU comes with both advantages and disadvantages. However, in terms of an economic point of view, Eastern European economies are not catching up with their Western neighbours as quickly as many had hoped for. In fact, only 3 European nations are on par with a 3% GDP annual growth rate, and yet for many others, including the so-called star of Eastern Europe, Poland, are not seeing much growth at all. In fact, barely above the EU average growth rate of 1.8%. One of the main reasons for this is the displacement of people, with many Eastern Europeans seeking jobs and income in other EU member states, not creating a brain drain in this case, but more a labour drain, which, as any economist will tell you, can be fatal to domestic production, as factories run dry of staff in order to keep running. A declining birth rate in Eastern Europe is also another major factor in the equation. With less people being born, the ability to fill the slots of those ahead of them is in decline. Hence meaning not only are jobs not being continued, but pensions are not being supported by the younger groups, hence leaving the elderly in a very difficult situation. It's no hidden secret that many people in Eastern Europe are disillusioned by the EU, and for those old enough to remember the past, the notion of being given equal opportunities, salaries, and some kind of sustenance is better than the current situation that many people find themselves in today.
Belarus is certainly one of the most interesting nations in Europe. Its Soviet status past is long gone in theory. Yet there remains clear indicators that some elements are still very much in place within the Belarusian system, both on a political, social, and economic front. Yet it seems that once again, foreign powers are playing a part in the current civil unrest in the country, with the likes of the US and EU supporting the protests there, not necessarily in order to support the people of Belarus, but more likely in order to send a message to its closest ally, Russia. Well, the current world order has numerous examples of what is happening in Belarus, with Hong Kong playing a similar role in the West's clear attempts at playing the role of agent provocateur in order to send a message to China. However, it seems that neither China or Russia are about to be fooled or influenced by Western pressure. Don't forget, we want to hear your thoughts and comments about this topic or any other story you might want to share with us. We want to hear from you. And like some of our past shows, we may just end up featuring your story as a topic on Economic Divide. So don't hesitate to contact us via Twitter using the marker @ED_program. You can watch this episode of ED again by logging on to our website and clicking on shows, where our on-demand service is just a click away. so make sure you check it out. That's all the time we have for this week's episode. We hope you've enjoyed the show. On behalf of myself, Kabatagwe, and the whole team here on Economic Divide, thanks for watching, stay safe, and see you again next time.